Sometime in December.
Next year.
Or next May.
So we'll get going. I appreciate everybody taking the time to come down here. I'm gonna give a little brief introduction, right? You know, this committee is put together to talk about the boundary agreement that was developed over 10.5 years ago for the Nepco Lake property that was purchased by developer, I guess you could say, and worked with the village and Saratoga and other things to put the agreement together that would accommodate everybody, right or wrong, I guess. I put a committee together today that has some people that have some interest in it, that were part of the developer agreement, and I also have a resident from the village, and I have a former administrator from the village that had a big part of writing this. So I'll be honest with you, a lot of the questions that you're gonna ask, he's probably got more knowledge than me, and I'll accept that or whatever. And you know, basically as this goes on, you know, we'll take notes. If there's big questions, right, we got to dive into as the village staff to make sure we get the proper questions and answers back. So if there's any questions that I feel that I can't answer, and if anybody in the room can't, we will write those down at the next meeting. We'll come back with, you know, the exact answers to those questions. I plan this meeting to last an hour and a half after that. You know, I think the key points have maybe been pushed out the door, and we can meet at the next meeting. So I guess I'm gonna call the meeting, which I did. Is there anybody interested in taking notes? If not, I'll copy it off the Zoom link tomorrow, which is not a big issue. You guys are okay? I'll just copy off the Zoom link, the notes. Public comment. I see we've got two people in person. Would you guys like to introduce yourself? Do you have any questions or concerns?
Oh, I'm Jeff from Debbie Peterzak.
Okay.
And we're actually the first house east of the bridge
Okay.
on Nepco Lake.
Okay.
We moved in last year, this time last year.
Okay.
So,
Great. Like I said, I mean, this is an open forum. If you have questions, you know, please, you know, raise your hand and we'll definitely try to answer them the best we can. I guess with that, I'd like to start and go around the room. Everybody can kind of introduce themselves. So start over here with Eric.
Sure. My name's Eric Hummel. I live on Nepco Lake on the East Shore for about the last 8 years. And I have a couple of hats. I'm on the village board right now, and I'm also the chair of the Nepco Lake District. So gonna juggle those hats and make sure I'm talking out of the right side of my mouth there.
I'm Al Kreider, and I live on Island Avenue, just a couple blocks up. Have for 31 years probably here in the village, and don't have any stake in anything, just learning and keeping my ears open.
Dave Allness, I work on Nepco Lake 40+ years, so I'm pretty familiar with everything that's going on. Just came to see what's going on, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm Joe Terry. I've been a village resident now for, I guess, 28 years. And I was the village engineer administrator from 97 through 2015. So I was involved in this project kind of from conception through all those discussion phases and that.
Larry Eisensee. I live on Nepco. I'm the eastmost house on Nepco, so right where 4 Mile Creek comes in, on Campfire Trail. Been a resident there for about 2.5 years.
Ben Martinson, lived here my whole entire life. My family got here, or raised my family here. I've been at the village for maybe 24 years this April. Been on the bottom, worked my way up. Now I'm the public works director / administrator coordinator. So just started this year in November. So this is all kind of new to me, but I'm trying to learn through everybody to see what we need to do. So like I said, please work with me if any questions you have. I'll definitely find the right information for you, the facts. I don't have it today, but I'll research and be able to bring it back to you guys the next meeting. I guess with that, you know, we've got a history review of the boundary agreement. And I've copied in your packet. There's three different basic information boundary agreements between the village of Port Edwards and town of Saratoga. The village of Port Edwards agreement with the Valesky development for Nepco Lake. And so there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that went together. The last one, I guess, maybe is more important, the Village of Port Edwards with, development agreement with Pulaski's. That definitely has, some high key points, I guess, and like I said, I'll hit a couple, and we can go back around the room and everybody, can kind of give their thought process, what we want to do, right? This agreement obviously was done in 2013. Village board, voted on this and agreed upon with the Pulaski development. It was a 10-year agreement. Basically, in simple terms, is that we were gonna use the Saratoga tax rate for 10 years. And then after that 10th year, it was gonna come back to the Village of Port Edwards at the local village tax rate. And, the utilities, the roads, all that, in the developer's agreement were basically to be constructed and provided by the developer and then maintained through, I guess there's a lot of, that's kind of a top question, right? If it's HOH, if it's the developer, who's gonna maintain that, right? And I guess that's why we're some of the things we're here to talk about and discuss, right? The painting, the roadways, mowing of the grass, things like that. In the meantime, when the boundary agreement was in place, the village did receive 80% of, the taxes that did come into Saratoga over those years, and I do have that kind of factual information. The village was getting roughly about $20,000 a year, right? Towards the last couple of years, we've increased that a little bit, and I can definitely give you guys that information. And obviously that was just because when the village went into this agreement, we were taking away some of our tax revenue or equalized value to make this all put together. So, the village did see a change in what they were collecting in taxes over this boundary agreement originally taken place. So I guess at this time, we can dive in if we want to go around the room. If somebody has questions on this agreement, concerns, I guess I'd like to start a general conversation with the agreement itself. I don't know if you want to go right around the room. Eric, if you're okay, or we can start anyone else if anybody has any questions, or pass if you don't, and we can see where it goes.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Al, thanks for joining. I think it's really nice to have a party that hasn't been part of it at all and kind of fresh eyes. Joe, I know that you have appeared here since I've been here, talking at budget kind of things. I always was impressed by your points of view and so forth. I know you put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate you coming today and helping us understand kind of the context behind some of the things and kind of where we are at this point, even though you're not in a role to have much influence. Well, you have influence, but I mean, not to do much with it then, but it's interesting to see kind of like what was the original thinking and where are we now and what does that mean for things going forward? So again, I appreciate you being here. So there are tons of things that I think I'm curious about. Let's just start with the boundary agreement, and the recitals part has a lot of eloquent words about how great this is and how or the agreement was, and it adequately addressing the delivery of necessary municipal services to the residents affected by the agreement, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe we'll just skip that, and I'd like to go to some of the questions I have about what kind of the context, and Joe, maybe you could help us with that of what some of the matters were. Let's look at part D and G. And I'm curious what the intended services resulting from, quote, provides for reasonably efficient delivery of services. And the agreement addresses the delivery of necessary services affected by this agreement. What was your understanding about what that meant at the time?
Where are you at?
On the
On the first part in the recitals?
no, after that, part E and G.
So recitals, part D on page
Well,
one?
not the, yeah, actually it's a recital.
would be this part,
Mhm.
Joe, and then. All of G.
Okay.
I mean, was it discussed about what those services were at the time, or was it,
Yeah, it was. Um. So from my recollection, the primary issue that the board had uh, with just the whole concept of the development was that it was, from the board standpoint, it was pretty speculative.
mhm,
You've got a developer that's proposing to do a bunch of stuff, no guarantees. And we had, the village took over, it was before I started, but took over, Nepco Lake Road
yes.
and serving that area
Mhm,
was always a real challenge. Um, some of the area on the east side of the river, we had contracted with Wood County to do some of the snow and ice control maintenance. Um, some of the folks at Nepco Lake at the time, right? I mean, we're talking Nepco Lake Road was the only developments there.
right.
And then your place
Short trail.
was, I think,
Mhm,
out there to plow and to take care of yard waste and garbage. Um, with the size of the crew that we had here, it was always a challenge. And it was a challenge that was generally, I mean, we get some complaints about the timing, that we're focused on serving as many people as we could. And again, the population density on Nepco Lake Road wasn't super high. And so,
Yeah.
and a lot of those folks, they traveled for the winter. So, it wasn't, they were okay with the fact that it was a much delayed response for those activities. And the same goes with, some of the routine things, right? When we switched to uh, garbage collection where we were paying a contractor to do it, that kind of changed the equation there because they could fit it in with some of the other routes and some of the other townships. So that wasn't as big of a deal. But again, we had to make kind of special arrangements for yard waste collection and any other types of services, just because it was so impractical. And if we tried to do it on a regular basis, we couldn't get through town, without adding staff and equipment. So that was on the minds of the board. And for a couple of months, and I think you could probably, and again, this is my best recollection, you could probably refer to the minutes to validate it. But there were several months of presentations by the developer, and the board was just, we just can't, um, we can't see how we could afford to either increase the staff and equipment or reduce the level of services to serve a significantly larger area, especially if it's a lower density area.
mhm,
Where there's, you know, not necessarily well, there's not necessarily the resources anyway, the way local government currently works. It's, I mean, and Ben can vouch for that. Putting together, putting together municipal budgets is a real challenge. And when you take a look at the sustainability of our infrastructure under pretty much any municipal budget, it's not sustainable. Eventually, most municipalities are going to be in real trouble because there's just not, when you look, we have 20 some miles of streets.
Yeah.
If you want your street to last 40 years, you got to be rebuilding a half a mile of street a year. And we're probably a quarter of that, maybe less,
Yes, for sure. And
a couple blocks a year,
a
maybe.
couple boxes a year we're doing, where it's $500,000 to $700,000.
So that was the focus of the board at the time. And the answer was just no. And the Pavlovskis were very persistent. And we sat down and started talking about, well, if the board's even gonna consider this, there's gonna have to be some guarantees. I think we were bringing in about $7,000 in property tax a year from the mill that owned all the property. And, one of the first things that was required was that a lot of that land was in managed forest, which is why the property taxes were so cheap. One of the first requirements was, look, you get it out of managed forest. There's a windfall for the village because there's penalties that are paid when you pull it out of managed forest.
Mhm.
And the board could see then, well, we're not gonna kind of lose money to the taxpayers in this effort because we'll generate as much taxes in this windfall as we would have in I forget what it was, if it was 10 years or 15 years or whatever of development, even if there's no success. They don't sell a single lot. Village comes out ahead. So that was kind of the catalyst that got the board at least talking about it because it was a hard no.
Okay,
And then after that, the discussion really surrounded, okay, the plan there was similar to some of their other developments where, there would be community septic systems. It's a little unique, not a typical municipal type setting. It was more consistent with their town developments and some of the unique features that they did to make them work.
Mhm.
Get those septic systems away from the lake so they could get their permits and do them as a shared system. It's just a kind of an economy of scale type situation. And so, we were looking at that. Okay, we had some concerns about water and wastewater, but they talked about, look, we're gonna keep septic systems well away, just in general kind of concerns about public health and well-being 20, 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road, not just so you can make a buck selling some lots. And then we also talked about services. So that area was already served by police and fire. So we felt that was not going to be burdensome. Police department on routine patrols on the east side of the lake anyway, and they already run downtown line, so catching the streets, on the south side of the lake wouldn't be that burdensome. You're talking, what, couple miles, 3, 4 miles, so, another half an hour-ish to their patrol. That wouldn't be exceedingly burdensome. The fire department felt that, well, we've got mutual aid with other nearby departments.
Yep.
And I don't know if it ever happened or not, but I know there were provisions for some discussion about, we don't really have hydrants nearby. There's the potential for higher property insurance rates. Boy, if we could kind of work out some agreements with the neighboring township and or have some type of apparatus close by, that would make a big difference. And so that was included in here. I don't know, did they ever do
I'll answer that and then we'll go to you. So basically, the developer agreed to build us a pole shed. That was kind of the deal to put a truck in it. And obviously, you're not gonna put a $500,000 fire engine in a pole shed. So, that's been brought back up. Previous Joe, a lot of administrators talked to them, the developer, and said, well, what are you consisting of? And at the end of the day, everybody came with the same answer, that it was, $100,000. They give the property, we do have the property that's on the end of town line. But obviously the cost to build this building was, there wasn't enough cost from the developer to put together a fire station that would hold that size of truck and that amount of quality of truck, I guess. Dry hydrants we did, I know they worked on those, made sure Mingles Marsh, or the marsh in the different areas, we've got some good dry hydrants, and obviously with the City of Wisconsin Rapids and Grand Rapids and the Coosa Mutual Aid, the response out there, I don't believe there's any issues, but that was that.
So that was discussed.
Do you wanna?
Speaking of fire hydrant, I just talked to our neighbor Scott Steen. I don't know if you know him. And he was talking about the fire, we were talking about this tax rate. just with the mill rate and all that stuff going crazy, you know. And he was talking about the fire station supposed to have been, you know, down on the corner. Well, he just lost and he had to find new property insurance because he canceled it because of the fire hydrant issues. So, and I just heard about that. He was up here this week and I said, well, you gotta be kidding me, because we dealt with that before with losing. We were originally, we lived in Hawaii a little bit. And they were canceling insurance rates over there like crazy. We couldn't even sell homes. And so he ended up finding some other insurance. I asked what he's paying. So we didn't have any trouble, you know, so we're okay. So that's why I brought it up, because I don't know what this hydrant, what do they do for water? Bring in a water truck, go to the lake?
So the mutual aid, I mean, that's all ISO rating. The fire department every year needs to do ratings. Basically, that's regulated by the government, right? I mean, they come in there and see how many response areas you have, what they have for tankers, right? I mean, Grand Rapids. I mean, we have country homes too, right? I mean, we get outside of Fort Edwards. Once we get out of our city limits, I mean, even Mr. Terry doesn't live on, we don't have hydrants at his house, right? We got to take a pumper truck to his house. So, and we have residents in the village that don't all have hydrants in front of their
Oh,
house.
yeah, most rural
So-
ain't gonna have a hydrant.
So that'd be
I
this,
mean, summers, I mean, they don't, nobody's got them.
So your homeowner's insurance will generally ask the question,
Right.
where's the nearest hydrant?
I was just surprised when he told me, he said, oh yeah, they canceled our insurance and he canceled his neighbors, you know, and they had to go
Yeah.
find new ones. I said, the
Yeah.
hydrants? I said, you
Yeah.
kidding me?
No, that's, I know, you know, if I had a hydrant in front of my house, my insurance would be lower too. And again, that's just a little bit of the history of this kind of,
Sure.
what some of the discussion points were that, well, if we had a piece of apparatus in a building within so many feet of the development, it would rate differently and potentially have lower
ISO.
premiums or whatever. And so that was one of the services that was discussed at the time. And then the other service that was discussed was, well, you know, zoning, things like that aren't, you know, they're administrative burden, but it's not a regular, right? Public works or service effort type burden. But the other big one were the streets.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked about, you know, how to design the roads and streets out there. And, you know, the board was pretty clear. They didn't want the village maintaining those. They're just, when the numbers were run, even if it was full build out, the board didn't feel that there would be, funding that would support either additional staff or additional equipment and or whatever. To maintain that infrastructure without degrading either the service to the rest of the community or significantly increasing the tax rate. And so, we looked at, like, when I say we, the village board and myself, we looked at our ordinances and because the village president was still a hard no, that there's gonna be a loophole around this. And so what we did is we looked at the ordinances, looked at village standards and said, look, if they design streets, number one, put it in the development agreement that it's gonna be, you know, private. Number two, keep the right of way substandard. The village standard right of way width is 66 feet. Make it less than 66 feet so that if there's a ask for it to, you know, become a village street, it would be pretty burdensome to change it to 66 feet. And then the village was not specifically not involved in oversight of the design. That, look, you can design your private roads the way you want to design them. You can lay them out the way you want to lay them out. But then we also did something unique that the village hadn't done, and that was to establish a new zoning district called a planned unit development district. At the time, it was pretty new. I don't know that any other municipalities, like right around here, had a planned unit development. But one of the requirements of the village zoning at the time was that every lot had to be on a road. Public street, right? So that, and generally that's for all services, whether it's access to your property, sewer and water, whatever. And so, that was gonna be the other issues that, well, how do we zone this for development if our zoning ordinance requires road frontage. And we were running into the same dilemma with the mill property and the potential redevelopment for the mill property. How do we address that? So the village had hired a planning firm to offer some guidance there. And a number of municipalities across the state, well, across the country, but also in the state, had utilized a planned unit development type zoning. And that's unique in that you don't just do a partial plan. You plan the whole area, which can be risky for a developer, because if you don't do everything up front, sometimes things change before you get things sold, and now lots may not be as desirable and you want to refit things or resize things. Planned unit development, if you change it, the entire development has to get rezoned. It's a big deal. It's very burdensome. And so those were kind of the things that that convinced the board that, okay, if it's a planned unit development, we make sure it's in the development agreement. And then the other issue was, how do we make sure that the property owners know? Because this is gonna be a boundary agreement. This is also very unique. Most boundary agreements did just the opposite of what this boundary agreement did. Most boundary agreements offer more services to a particular area. So if you're in a town and it's building out, and there's an issue where the town and the incorporated municipality don't necessarily want to do an annexation for some reason, might do a boundary agreement. Maybe it's temporary. You do a boundary agreement, so you're providing more services, and then, there's some revenue change or whatever to provide services for an additional period of time. This one did just the opposite, where, okay, we're gonna provide less services. And that's where, using the town's tax rate was, just a what was it, 10% of the village tax rate, 10 or 20% or whatever it was of the village tax rate. I think it was 20% of the village tax rate. And then we were gonna split that 80-20, so that basically town's getting 20% of what it would have gotten, village gets 20% of what it would have gotten. And
that's where that.
that's where
That's where that 20 grand, it started. I mean, the first 2015, it was 4,000, and then 13, 21, 27.
Yeah, so
that's just kind of the history of that.
thanks for the context. That's really important. I have about 3 questions, and it covers some of the things in detail. In the agreement itself, on the boundary agreement, under municipal services, point B, did the village assessor, it says that the village shall assess the properties in the territory. Did the village, assessor, assess that, or did Saratoga?
No, the village did.
Okay, so help me understand why they assessed that property, but for 13 years didn't assess village proper, reassess the village proper during that same period of time.
So so the trigger for a reassessment is generally the assessment ratio. So if the assessor says that your property's worth 200,000, but if it's appraised or if it's sold for more than, I can't remember now if it's 10 or 20%.
Yes.
Do you remember?
I don't remember, that wouldn't recall, but I mean, that's why for a while, our village, we didn't get reassessed until the last couple of years, because we
Right.
were teeter-totting right around with the mill and things. We've been teeter-totting the reassessment.
So, right, so it's based on retail sales. And so the assessor puts an assessed value on it, but based on retail sales, the state will evaluate, okay, what is the ratio of what is assessed at and what is really supposed to be
You
worth?
understand that part, but
And
no
that's-
assessment, no assessment for 13 years was for the village proper
No.
reassessment.
For reassessment, yes, but if any house was built here, it was assessed.
Yeah, oh, got that.
Yep. Yep.
So here's what happened as a result of that not reassessing for 13 years, when our house, by the way, was assessed 3 different times in the 8 years so far we've had the house. Properties on the East Shore with similar square footage and much less property was assessed at least twice the assessment that on the north side of the lake was assessed at for those 13 years. So that disparity,
Sure.
yeah, that disparity was a hard swallow, when even though the village was only getting 80% of our
Yes.
taxes, you were getting 80% of a higher rate than
Yes.
what the rest of it was. So you understand
Oh,
how
absolutely.
that was like a,
Yep.
a
Well, and that is something that was brought up several times, is that when the Pavlovskis were developing, they mentioned that, there's a few of these properties on the north side that are probably undervalued. And they will be undervalued once we start building on the south side, right? Because the stuff actually sells, or the assessed value is based on actual sales. Like during this last reassessment, I blew a gasket too. My property just about doubled in value. And,
And-
not all the properties did.
no, I understand that, but frankly, you blew a casket because of how much it was, because it hadn't been reassessed in 13 years, right? Fair? So what I'm hearing is you all knew that there was a disparity in reassessment, between the new properties and.
No, you can only, so the assessed value is done by state standards.
Yes.
When assessments happen, whether it's new property or someone does, an addition or whatever.
Building permits is what they use. Obviously, every building permit that gets issued to the village goes to our assessor.
Right. So,
Gets those every year.
so the only way that the village board and the village knows that, look, and assess, and some municipalities have a policy that no matter what, every 10 years we revalue. We just do it, no matter what. Even if the assessment ratio is still at 100%, we're gonna do it anyway. And that, I think in this case, for me, right, where I live, would have made a difference, because properties in this particular housing market haven't changed value the same. If I had a $4 million house 10 years ago and the village is reassessed, my $4 million house is still gonna be about $4 million. If I had a $70,000 house, it's double. Right, so that one increased by 100%, but it's driven by market demand, right? So it's not,
Yeah.
it's hard to, and so, what the village had always done and did it when I was here, and my predecessor before me for 30 years, is until we hit that state threshold of where the assessed value and equalized value, where that ratio was getting close to that state mandated time, the village didn't do a revalue. And part of the reason for that is the revaluation is very expensive.
So $70-some thousand to do the.
Yeah,
evaluation.
then I don't understand, it's a moot point,
Mhm.
but I just don't understand why we got reassessed 3 times in that period of time and
Can
so
I
forth.
kind of throw something at you?
Yeah.
You could, and I'm not sure on this, but why you got reassessed 3 times?
First time because it was a new house.
Yeah.
Totally get that. But
And
the
what-
other 2,
And second time probably wasn't, or first time probably wasn't finished, second time maybe it was finished.
no, it was when it was finished. Cause I walked through the place with the assessor. Then I thought Saratoga did an assessment, and then the recent one that Port Edwards did an assessment. That was my
So
understanding.
did Port Edwards actually do a reassessment, or did they just actually use Saratoga's numbers?
We did a reassessment. Do I know exactly if they went through the houses? That I couldn't give you that, that's.
Yeah.
We hire them, I'll be honest,
Right.
we're their hands at me, we don't
Yeah,
get involved.
enough of that. I just want you to be aware that disparity was a hard swallow,
Mhm.
in terms of, common or similar properties in
Well,
the,
we could double check
And
with
I'll ask
Diane
the
on
bill-
that.
I'll ask the
Double
bill
check with
assessor. I've got
Diane.
her- Yeah, Diane, the bill
I'm
assessor, and I'll find
pretty
out.
sure that the assessment fell under. I know it fell under the village.
well, that's what it said, that's what the agreement said it was gonna do, so, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Second one had to do, let's just talk a little bit about the building of the private roads. So, you all were, the representatives were aware of the width and depth of the roads that were going to be built, is that correct?
yep, we did get plans, yep.
And were the representatives, and the statement is that the developers were to shift the ownership of those to a homeowners association. Were you aware of that?
Yes, yep.
So were you also aware that there were only two directors of the homeowners association and they're the two developers, and the homeowners have no say in what happens in terms of fees for things? Was the board aware of that?
No, not specifically. I think the board's concern was that they're private. And there's a homeowners association that,
That has no say. Yeah.
well, that ends up being responsible for the overall maintenance. So anything outside of that, as far as the makeup of the homeowners association, that should have been part of the purchase of the property. There should have been, I forget what it's called. But it gets recorded,
Covenant, there are covenants
Yeah.
there that say that.
right?
I think the challenge is, as we were told, the homeowners own the roads, the two developers control it. And that's how it's been for 10, 11, 12 years.
Okay,
And that doesn't seem like a lot of input to the people. Didn't seem like much forethought in terms of what's gonna happen to the homeowners with that. And the village has been aware of that for at least several years, that's been the case. So, so you guys were aware, I guess you were aware of that, but might not have been aware that the only two directors are the two developers.
I think previous administration, I mean, I think when the roads were private, the village kind of stayed out of the business, right? I mean, once they were private, their village wasn't into how the roads were gonna get maintained wasn't our concern, I guess, right? I don't mean to be the way, but that was, that all the administrators have looked into, they've been here and they're like, it's written in the agreement, they're private roads. However they run their HOA, the village really doesn't have any say on that.
I guess it's the hands-off kind of thing that it is troublesome to
From
me.
what I remember, I went to quite a few of the meetings when they're all being built. From what I remember, they were gonna be on the board, the two of them, but they were gonna have three homeowners on too.
None have been,
And that's, if it did happen
Never
or not,
happened.
if never, I.
Yeah.
Not privy to that information, but that's what they brought to the board. That's how I remember.
just also, there's supposed to be a annual meeting where finances are shared. It's never happened. I have no idea how
Is
money,
that in your covenants?
yes, it's in the covenants. We have no idea how money's been spent. We have no idea if there's a reserve fund for maintenance.
Well, I would speculate if it's in the covenants. I mean, the homeowners could potentially, right, file a claim that this
Yeah,
is the agreement.
suing the developers, that's what you'd have to do, right?
Right, at least file the claim, yeah,
Okay, so anyway,
because you should know. I
just
mean, if it's in the
raising
contract,
that
you
as
should know.
another kind of,
Yeah, rub,
challenge that's going on, and I'll ask a third one here. On number 13 in the agreement says that there's an indemnification for 3 years post-agreement, where, and there's another piece that speaks about all the work that will be done will be of a high quality and professional grade work of the development. So if anybody has been aware of the less than high grade or professional work that's been done during those 10 years?
well, while I was here, I wasn't aware of any work that was not professionally done.
Yeah, so,
In the work that was, I mean, there is some issues on the roads right now. I mean, when the roads were built, they're at a high quality. I mean, I know there's some deteriorating and falling down now. So I guess it's determining if
Maintenance
it's
is,
just, it's a maintenance thing. I mean, when it was built,
no, I'm
They
not
want
talking
it
about the
built.
roads, I'm talking about the seawall that was built that caused the road to go down. The seawall on both sides of the point were deteriorated to the point where it was falling in, almost falling into the lake. That was not high quality. Okay, and so I'm wondering, if, with only a year to go here, is there room for, the village to check into the, possibility of the indemnification for 3 years post-agreement?
that would be definitely a question I would bring through legal. I mean, that would come through our legal, whatever, and explain to him the situation. Obviously, when that built, the homes out there, I mean, everything was signed off on occupancy permit, meaning everything was, at one time was at a high quality, right? I knew it deteriorated, but it wasn't, I don't think it was built improper to start with falling. It's been falling in the last few years, correct?
Well, I think the challenge, I think it's high quality if it falls down within, 10 years of it being built. To me, that doesn't imply that it's a very high quality.
Yeah, no, and I'll definitely check with legal to see,
Yeah.
if that,
where's the
how that 3 year would go and
It's in the.
if that would be covered.
And so, Joe, thank you so much for the background and so forth. I appreciate that. I think what I'd like to do is reserve conversation about investments made by homeowners through taxes during those 10 years and how that was spent and what's been spent right now, given the services we have, maybe to our next meeting, because I think that's a different discussion than just the agreement itself.
Yeah, I mean, again, right, and I mean, the tree and brush service, right, I mean, right, I mean, that's the service that we're giving the residents twice a month. We're going over there, tree and brush and grass pickup. That was an added service, obviously, the garbage goes on the taxes, that's, nothing that, is a service or whatever, but, and then obviously the day-to-day conversations of, if there's any, that people do call questions on things over there, we do answer those. Obviously, all the permits and things like that, the village has taken care of.
At the last board meeting, it was discussed about what the public works were the meat and potatoes of the budget. And I don't see much meat and potato services other than picking up brush twice a month. And so let's just have that conversation separate in the amount because there was $216,000 collected during that 10 months that was given taxes to the village, plus $100,000 that the Pavlovskis who eventually charged the owners. It says in there that they were going to get charged $2,000 when lots were sold.
Mhm.
So that's $316,000 during that 10 years, much less than what you were promised, correct?
Mhm.
Because there weren't.
Well, right, because it didn't get fully built out. So I wouldn't say the village was promised anything, but there was an understanding that, look, with the planned unit development, this is the number of lots. So this is the impact fees.
With
And-
$80 million of value is what,
Up to, yeah.
up to $80
Yep.
million, kind of fell short of that, didn't it?
Because what's it at, 30, 20,
About 40.
40, so half?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I can tell you during my tenure, building permit fees cover some of the costs of building and zoning projects, but not, they don't.
Well, $25,000 a year is what we pay for a building inspector.
Yeah,
And we're bringing in, even with our little inspection, I mean, with everything, we're lucky if we bring in 10 to 12,000, if we're lucky, half of that.
yeah, so I mean,
That's been a good year. Right now we're down to 2 or 3 new homes being built throughout everything, right? So,
and again, when I was here, when there was a new permit, we'd go down and I would personally take a look to see, our erosion control measures in place, that type of thing. So there was some service there that those funds were paying for, albeit indirectly, right? I mean, the village budgeted my salary. What I spent my time on was at the direction of the village board, but that was the expectation is that, look, when permits are issued, you go out and check on that stuff.
So there were $216,000 worth of permits?
No. I mean, there's fire protection, there's police protection, there's typical,
I mean, 30,000 a year. I mean, I've got the numbers. I mean, the first year we only got $4,000.
I understand that, but our treasurer said over that period of time, there was $216,000 of tax money that went to the
over 10
village,
years.
plus $100,000 that
Yeah.
was prepaid for
Yep.
lots sold.
Yep.
So, and when I asked what services were provided, the answer was they went to the village to quote, remain the village solvent.
But we also took a hit when we lost that property. I mean, our tax rate in the village went up when those properties came off of our value.
What?
Basically, our tax rate in 2013, the village tax rate was 1091. 2016 went to 1234 because we lost the value of those properties. When it went out,
Saratoga.
the Saratoga. That's
So
why.
it's kind of like a,
Yeah, sorry,
Kinda like a
but you
tip.
guys knew that was gonna happen, right? I
right,
mean,
yes, yep.
So anyway, let's talk about money later. I think those were some relevant things that, as a homeowner who sees that amount of money and is told, well, no, we really want to have the village be solvent, kind of a hard thing to swallow.
Sure.
With brush being the main, service other than, police officer 2 or 3 times rolling through the area and fire and so forth that, by the way, I love the fire agreement because the Rapids people can get there really quick.
Mhm.
Don't have to start here with a volunteer and drive all the way over there and so forth. So I get that. But anyway, those were some of the questions I had. I'm sorry to take so much time.
No, but I mean, if we want to move forward in the next meeting, we need to know what information, you'd like us to research, I guess.
Yeah, I'd like to know how much money. Okay, so, and I have that in record from what Diane gave me, the
Yeah,
treasurer.
I've got it right here for the last.
And I'd like to understand even this year, or in 2024, what the taxes for the group of tenure study people or agreement went to and how much taxes we paid and what percent of the total taxes collected by residents that includes.
Yeah, 33,000 this year.
33,000.
You gotta remember, only a portion of what
I
you're paying
understand.
property taxes goes
I
to the
understand
village, yeah.
You know what, one thing is we gotta get, we don't get into the meat and potatoes like you guys. We're normal people that all we see is a tax bill come in.
Yep.
And we know it was gonna go up because Saratoga is going to Port Edwards, and all the agreement they had. And then I think the mill rate's at 983 now for Port Edwards. I don't know if it went up past that. But, I talked to our neighbor, and he comes over and he says his bill goes up double to $20,000. I said, $20,000 for a property? I said, you kidding me? But we don't see any of that. All we see is what are we getting for it? I'm paying you guys, these guys money. What am I getting back for it? I don't see any different services with Saratoga. We were only there a year, so like I said, I don't know. I had a problem with Lakeport Road. I don't know if you guys were driving. I'm sure some of you guys drove over it when there was ice on it. I was slid off that damn thing. If I would have hit a dry spot on the side, I would have been gone. I just happened to have a Brandon, the cop from Port Edwards, was happened to park inside the turnaround by our thing there. And I went over, I said, what's going on with this road? They can't even drive on it. He didn't know. He said, I gotta get a hold of somebody. He said, he agreed with me. So he ended up calling people up. A cop had to call people up, and finally somebody came over there and took care of the road. I said, that shouldn't be. I mean, if I'm paying taxes, where's this money going?
So,
I see the same garbage pickup I had when I moved in. That hasn't changed, I didn't see a brand new shiny new truck or anything. I hear about the fire department, guys losing their insurance, you'd have to go because there's no hydrants, and I just happened to see a brush truck going out from Port Edwards. I don't know where he was going, but brush, what brush do I got? What am I paying for brush? I mean, you know what I mean? But this is what the common people gotta see.
No,
We're dishing all this money and it's like, and we had our house. Now we built it, like I said, we just moved in. And I know the tax, and I just talked to the tax appraiser in Appleton. And they were just there, just in April or so, and they talked to Jim Schultz, the builder, And cause he called me and said, hey, I got the guy here, he's appraising your house, blah, blah, blah. So we got the bill, I think our bill was from, might have been a partial from April, we got our bill from May or whatever. you know.
8 months.
I just got a letter in the thing, our property just went up $139,000. I said, what happened from now until then? He says, well, you're reappraised. I said, wait a minute, I had a 2-bedroom home with no basement, I got a walkout basement that's not done, I had it then, I got it now. How the hell did it go up $139,000? He said, well, we go back to January, we start in January, you know, and all this, you know, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you know
Yep,
all that.
yep.
I said, he knew it back then, there was a two-bedroom back then. I said, all of a sudden now the house got better? He said, well, it's finished. It was finished then.
Nothing changed.
Nothing changed.
Yeah.
Except I got $139,000 bill on it. You know, I mean, it's just like.
It's,
Out of
it's
mine
the
went up.
market, and then again, that's your
You
dream.
guys go through it,
Yeah.
you know, but
Well,
we don't see the meat and potatoes part of it. You
So-
know,
so
all
one-
we see is what do we get for the money?
One of the things-
For the lake, we gotta pay so much money for the lake.
One of the
You know?
things I will say is, you know, because again, if I were working here, this is what I'd say, because I had to say it for 20 years. Like at my place, I don't use the grass and brush collection services, right? So I'm paying taxes for a service that I'm not using. I don't have curb and gutter. I don't have storm sewer. I don't have sanitary sewer. I don't have water main. I generally don't use the parks, right? And so what am I getting for what I'm paying for? The answer is, doesn't matter. The service is a public service and we all pay for the public service. And it's, and whether we like it or not, in Wisconsin, it's based on the value of your home. And so what, you know, one of the challenges there is that, you know, if you theoretically, if you had a park across from the street and you had curb and gutter and you had storm sewer and you had all these things, well, your assessment would be different than what it actually
Yeah.
is. And so as disgruntled, and Ben knows, I bent his ear pretty hard when the assessor came through. I mean, I probably talked to you and the village staff a number of times because I was not happy about it. But the fact remains, the value is based on similar sales. And if your property's worth X because, or it's assessed at X because other properties similar to that sold for that, that's what it is. I know, you know, there was a couple properties that I was always amazed on the north shore of Nepco Lake that, you know, they're paying 25,000 or more a year in property taxes, and that was back in the 90s, you know,
Are you sure about that?
pretty sure.
That isn't the assessments I saw in the Wood County.
No, I have to look again, but I know we were always, you know, we talked about it as staff here, that man, you know, that's a big bill. Right?
Is Port Edwards, are they losing? You know, people, I mean, businesses going out, because that's another thing they told me. So, well, you know, if they're not getting growth. And they're
Well,
losing growth.
I can tell you, my job right now, I work for a community that's growing almost as fast as any other community in the state. And they have a ridiculous amount of growth, and they have the same problems, right? That growth
Causes money.
isn't enough, right? So, you know, and in most cases that with that growth, the developer pays for the new road. The developer pays for the utilities that go in. But when it needs to be replaced, the developer doesn't pay for it. And unless the municipality sets up a depreciation fund and starts setting money aside for when that road fails in 50, 60 years, there's no money to pay for it. And so even as you see development, again, it's just the way the revenue system works for municipalities. There's not enough there to recoup those actual costs. And again, it's gonna be something that maybe in my lifetime, but there'll be a number of municipalities that are really gonna have to look at how they maintain things differently. And a lot of them have already. I mean, when I worked in the city of Wisconsin Rapids, we started a transportation utility because there was no way we could be sustainable with the roads. You set the utility, and now I here in Port Edwards, if I'm visiting a place in Rapids, they're charging me through their fees, I'm helping pay for their trip. So there's different things that municipalities are doing to help kind of recoup some of those costs, but yeah, it doesn't seem fair. And I'll tell you, you're not alone. I'm right there with
No,
you.
no, I mean,
But I have the unfortunate,
And the assessment, the village is off on this, I mean, the assessments, I mean, once a year, we have basically an open session, you can come down here and talk to the assessor. And even after all the revals, I mean, how sad it was, people, there a hot topic, but only 2 people came down here to actually talk to the assessor after our reval. I mean, and every year we have a time that he's set up and he's down here, you come and discuss before the taxes are printed, I think it's in November normally. We have a day where you come down here and
I got my money's worth because I talked to him for,
give the information out for that? or-
I can absolutely, that's probably, I'll make sure it gets out. Yeah, no, we can, yeah, it's definitely, I think it's November, I don't know for sure, but it's the time or whatever from noon till whatever he's here and you can discuss before the taxes get done. And I know people, I've give the assessor numbers out. I mean, again, that the village hires that service, there's nothing, we don't have anything to do with it, I mean, but people do call them and rattle them, and I don't think they get very far with them, like I said. I mean, he follows their criteria, he's got what he follows in his book, if it's the house that's sold down the road, things like that. I mean, again, you know, we've had houses in town that were $50,000 houses and now are 250. I mean, there is no thing, a $50,000 house anymore, and I think everybody in this room probably took an increase in value and increase in taxes this year. I mean, that's.
I'm sorry, Al and Larry and Joe, I took all that time to ask those questions. I got a lot out of it, but are there things you guys want to ask today? And I can send you any other financial questions for next meeting, how would that be? But
No.
I'm just getting an education
okay,
and I'm listening for what was the village's responsibility when this agreement was written? And has the village violated the agreement that they made? I'm hearing a lot about the developers and I'm listening for what promises did they make and has the developer held up the agreement that they made 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And then, you know, honestly, and I'm not in the situation of owning property out there, but what is the responsibility of the homeowner coming into that property to know this information coming in? That's what I'm listening for. I'm not making a judgment, just listening for that.
we knew as much as what the representatives did when they made the agreement. And you assume goodwill and good intent and follow through. That's right? And that's the challenge.
Is there any, excuse me, but is there any truth to that East Shore Trail and that whole area in there, that the roads aren't up to spec? I keep hearing that. They're not either wide enough, they're not deep enough. or
So
something.
village,
That's why you
so
don't see a
we have
lot of-
village ordinances, right, for right of ways and for thicknesses and gravel and all that stuff, right? Our village has an ordinance, but that was what Joe was talking about. When the board talked about the roads and they wanted to make sure they were private, the village didn't oversee the roads, right? They weren't built to our asphalt, they weren't built to our gravel standards, they weren't built to the village standards because they were not village roads, right? If I want to develop in Port Edwards right now, I have to follow the village ordinance to develop those roads.
Because I keep hearing, 'cause we're at the end of East Shore Trail on the west, right by the bridge there, and they got that turnaround there, you know, where they
Gravel.
got access to the lake for Lost Lake. They said you can't, because the turnaround ain't big, they gotta make the turnaround bigger.
Yeah.
I hear that one, you know, they gotta be able to get the truck around and they can't do it.
Yeah.
But that's the stuff we hear, you know.
I'm sorry, Larry, did you?
So, 3 questions. One, just to help level set me, Ben, our expected outcome from this ad hoc committee is what? Are we coming up with, options, a recommendation, options with a recommendation?
Yeah,
What are
so-
we doing?
I mean, obviously, it was brought up at a board meeting, right? Some concerns that was across the river. And basically in the development area, and our board basically recommended that we put an ad hoc committee together to discuss the questions, what's out there, you know, what's everybody's concerns, what it is, and then at the end of the day, again, that has to go back to our, planning our pit committee, basically, we run this back to, at that, we basically tell them what our suggestions, thoughts are, and again, they have to make motions, they have to make any kind of movement, right? This is just discussion that we can give recommendations back to the pit committee, which would then have to go to board if we're looking for any big changes, if that helps you. But it was recommended by the board. It was brought many times, and again, previous administrators, everybody's dived into this, right? And we're just trying to have a good discussion, get everybody's thoughts on it and get the research and get the information back out to everybody. You know, there was some misinformation, right? I mean, I'm stuck in a hard spot there, but then again, I support every administrator that's better, but I mean, one guy basically told you guys that the village is gonna get $250,000 a year extra in taxes back. Well, that the village didn't, I mean, maybe that's on the board. We did not get our revenue did not go up by that much. We have the same levy that we had the last 3 years, around 3 million some dollars. So we didn't gain a big levy increase, right? I mean, in simple terms, our tax rate went down. Everybody's tax rate went down, even though taxes values went up, but our tax rate has went down since everybody came back, right? That's simple terms. Are we talking $10? We're up to 12, right? It came to 9. So all we did was increase our value, but what we get from taxes, and it did not change. So there was no big increase in taxes in the village of Port
It
Edwards.
got generated into dollars for the budget, right?
Correct. I mean, there's in here, I mean, like I said, we're still dealing with that same amount of money. So, so it's a challenge on that. But again, I guess back to your question, you know, the village just wants to get some communication from everybody. So, you know, the board meetings aren't the place to have that back and forth discussion, right? We're getting more depth into this. You guys have bigger questions. That's what we're gonna come out with the better answers, the long answers, and so that you guys can have a better idea. And again, if there's a recommendation out of this committee, we'll bring that to the pit committee. I'd probably have one, you know, if we come to an actual thought, I'd probably have one of you four come to the pit meeting and present that to that committee with, you know, this is what we discussed as 4 ad hoc committee members, and we'd like this to be discussed at the village level.
And my hope is that maybe we have 3 or 4 options to see what the board would say about, because I think just a yay or nay isn't really kind of, to me, that isn't what I was after. I mean, it could be that we end up saying that, the board says, no, I'm not gonna do anything. Okay. But this discussion has been going on for years, and I think this is an opportunity to bring it to some point of clarity that wipes away some of the things that we were told before that aren't going to happen. And if there is anything to be done, maybe there are some options to think about what they could be. And I think this committee could maybe address that.
So if I can repeat that back, I want to make sure that I'm clear. So we're going to hear concerns. We're going to do some fact finding. We're going to develop some options, and we're going to make a recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, that's
kind of what
we all, I mean, again, but it's, nobody here has a village vote or opinion, but we can make a recommendation or a suggestion back, and that's what the village board would like, I think.
Perfect. Second question, Eric, that seawall that's failing, where is that located?
Where is what?
The seawall that's failing?
Yes.
Where is that located?
Well, the seawall was repaired by the homeowners on the west side of the point. But there was litigation involved in that. I don't know the outcome of the litigation as to who was going to cover the cost of that. On the northeast side, that's
Sunset Point.
yeah, that's a Sunset Point area, and that's still has to be addressed.
Okay, so Sunset Point is where this is
Yeah.
at. Okay.
And as the village, we, again, the roads, I sent a letter of concern from the safety of the village crew and our garbage and police and fire over the issue. We sent it to the 5 residents on that in the developer. We just sent a letter just letting them know that there's a concern for us driving police, fire, brush, grass, those vehicles down there, whatever, just so that they're aware of that, our concern of that.
Okay. So I thought of another question that's come up. When it comes to roads, we're talking about over by me, Campfire, Fly Rod, Fish Camp, South Bluff. Those are all within this conversation, right? Town line is not our problem, right? Town line is a,
Town line's not-
taking care of.
not-
Between the village and
Yeah.
town.
Okay.
It's not private.
okay. South Shore, Camp Road, Point Trail,
East
Point
Shore,
Cove, those,
East Shore Trail.
basically everything off the town line. Correct.
Right, so I'm on this side of 13, right? So, South Shore Camp Road, Point Trail, Point Cove, Cove Trail, those are all still in Saratoga, right?
On the west side of 13?
West side
Yeah,
of
those
13.
are all.
Well, not Point Cove.
Okay.
Point Cove is part of Port Edwards.
Just to the curve.
It's a small area.
Yeah, that was the old road to the YMCA camp.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Then Silver Canoe Drive, Northwoods Drive.
Yeah, I think there's two houses on each one of those.
Those are all, okay, those are all in what we're talking about, Nepco Lake Road, we've talked about. Gardner's Lane and Private Beach Trail. Those are west side, right by 13 on the north.
Gardner's Lane's closed.
That's closed.
Was it Mill Road?
Yeah, okay,
That's no longer function. It's blocked off.
all right. And Private Beach Trail, is that,
Grand Rapids.
that's Grand Rapids? Okay. And then, thank you. My last question, Joe, what I'm trying to reconcile, and I can't find it in here, but I know there's mention of the roads being private. But then there's also mention that in the developer agreement that to the extent of any improvements, blah, blah, blah. And that was the next. Give me one second. There's a note that basically says that the developer will follow Port Edwards's regulations when it comes to whole filing things, and one of them is plats and subdivision.
Mhm.
And in plats and subdivision ordinances where the road specs are, right? So I feel like the agreement says saying two things. It's saying private road, but that they will follow the plats and division regulations. So
Yeah, so,
those are saying opposite things, I feel like.
well, I could see where you would think that. If it were a public road, right, the plats and subdivision defines public roads. Gotta be 66 foot
Mhm.
right away and all that. It's not a public road. So that's the key point there. But as far as the subdivision of property, zoning, enforcement of zoning regulations, permitting, all that stuff has to be consistent with the village ordinance. That was the intent.
So when it says, so it's here in section 4A, right? Subject to village ordinances, and regulations relating to land use, blah, 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 subdivisions and plats, impact fees, stormwater regulations.
And this is in the development agreement or
This is the boundary
in the
agreement.
boundary
Yeah,
agreement?
sorry. Page 3. At the bottom.
What page?
Page 3 of the boundary agreement, section 4A. During the term of the agreement, the territory shall continue to be subject to only to village ordinance and regulations related to land use, blah, 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 including subdivision and plat.
Yep.
So is it the understanding at the time that the boundary agreement was made that that would exclude the roads portion or the streets portion of subdivision and
The
plat?
public streets portion, yes.
But there's no public streets in the area, right? Are there public streets and private roads within the area of the agreement?
Just private roads.
There's just private.
Yeah.
So that's the part I'm getting stuck on, is there was a call out for this without excluding roads. And that's,
Sure. Yeah, I
Makes
think the
sense.
public versus private is the exclusion,
Yeah.
just by the nature of, because it's not a public road. Cause there is nothing here with a caveat.
Mhm.
Floodplain zoning is floodplain zoning. Building code is building code.
So would Nepco Lake be part of, be a public road where they would be developing? Would that kind of fit what he's talking about? Nepco Lake is already there, but if they develop off it, then the village would take care of that road, or it would be the village specs or.
Nepco Lake Road,
Well, it's-
Yes.
If you build
Yeah.
a street off of Nepco Lake Road, you're saying, right? The developer was gonna build a street off of Nepco Lake Road.
If it was gonna be a public street, then yes. And if it wasn't gonna be a public street, you'd have to go through, again, a plan unit development process, because you can't have a lot. The village can't legally approve a plat that has a lot that isn't adjacent to a public road or has access.
What I'm saying is, that was part of their property where they could develop, so if they were gonna do the private or public street, they would have to follow in
Yeah, I mean,
the village.
right, those areas aren't currently platted.
And they
So-
never did do any public street stuff, so that it was kind of covered both things, but they never followed through with anything to be public.
Is Nepco Lake Road a public road?
Nepco Lake Road is a public road.
More narrow, have the same
Yes.
depth as, the
66
roads
foot
that
right of
we're
way.
Talking about their project.
It's 66 foot right away. But yeah,
It's also 100 years old.
it is.
Yeah,
And again, before I left, my recommendation was if that road's gonna be improved, it gets centered on the right of way, it gets updated to municipal standards. And I think that was, my opinion is that was an oversight on the village's part when that agreement was made. That agreement was made in a different time, right? The mill ran the town and the people that ran the mill lived on Nepco Lake Road.
Right.
But typically when there's a jurisdictional transfer, like private road becomes public. County road becomes a village road or a city road, or a state road becomes a municipal road. When the jurisdictional transfer takes place, the road is made to new condition, right? If the DOT is gonna do a jurisdictional transfer, say, "Ah, look, we don't, this is a parallel highway, we don't want it anymore. Whatever, we want you to take it. All right, well, before we take it, it's gonna be new. And then at least we've got, years of maintenance that's far less costly than replacement.
So was the expectation then that they would stay, I think I heard you say this, but I want to make sure I understood, that they would stay private in forever in perpetuity?
For this planned unit development, yes. Yeah, that it'd be private in perpetuity. And again, that was really just because of the challenges of servicing. Yeah, that was the intent. And that was, frankly, that was the only way at the time, right? I mean, obviously, things can change, but at the time, that was the only way that the village board was gonna approve even considering the project. Cause it was, like I said, it was a hard, no. They didn't wanna do it. There were people that were interested in, look, it should stay. It's a special lake. It's unique. We don't wanna see any development around it. This is not good for the community. And the board was siding with that. And like I said, it took a long time and a lot of discussion before
well, the
they even
giveaway.
brought it up. Yeah, before they even brought it up for a vote.
I do want to commend, Ben, the quality of care that you all have with Nepco Lake Road. It looks really good. It's chipped. It's plowed, and I commend you guys for how well you're taking care of that road.
I do want to mention something that might, I don't know if it'll be of interest or not. A friend of mine lives in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and he lives in a subdivision with private roads. And their homeowners association were having they were different challenges, but they were road related challenges. In their case, it was maintenance and weight of vehicles. Their issue was more about school buses and plow trucks and garbage trucks and stuff like that. On what was designed to be a real light duty road. Their concern, and what I ended up doing was just a little private consulting. Their concern was more about how do we maintain what should be done to maintain this road? Like, our homeowners association is responsible for it. But we don't know what to do and when to do it. So I helped them develop a maintenance schedule. And I didn't have any, I wasn't in a position to offer like suggestions for contractors and such, but I was able to offer them a maintenance schedule and some narrative on
Yeah.
loading, right? So that at least they could, as a homeowners association, agree, okay, well, this is gonna be our general plan. And, I took a drive out in your neighborhood and, I looked at the roads and I thought, and again, I didn't realize that there wasn't an active homeowners association. But my thought was, it's really overdue for crack filling. And then there's a process after that. On a light volume street built on sand with a reasonable amount of maintenance. Not being like super stingy, but not being crazy aggressive. You can get a road to last 50, 60, 70 years. But it needs to be maintained.
Correct.
And that was one of the things that I thought maybe coming out of this ad hoc committee might be at least some guidance on how might the homeowners schedule maintenance, and or who might you call for some assistance to provide that type of service, right? A crack filling service or a chip sealing service, or um,
If we controlled the roads, we would have that study done and look at what in 10 years and in 20 years, the likelihood of what kind of maintenance needed to be done. And we would have been drawing on a reserve fund for that period of time.
Right.
I don't believe there's any reserve fund.
yeah, that's
And all we get are announcements that we owe $300 and it's due in a month, and if it's late, it's a 20% increase in the cost of it. That's all the information we get.
yeah,
That's
that's
a problem.
it is, because you really, I know when I had that conversation with the residents in Cedar Rapids, once they understood, what are we looking at here? What do we need to do to make sure that this stuff is maintained? It's like, well, it's really not, it wasn't as expensive as they thought it was. And it wasn't really as frequent as they thought it was. And it's like, okay, we can do this, but they had control in order to plan it and schedule it. And then we're able to kind of set up as part of their homeowners association bylaws that, look, somebody or a group of us are gonna walk it and make some determinations, because one size does not fit all.
You're gonna have a reserve fund.
Yeah.
Yearly, so that you can cover the cost of it, except as
Mhm.
opposed to having a huge.
All of a
cost,
sudden,
all of it,
yeah.
all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
So some of I guess the question again, I'll look back and it'll probably go to Bill's legal, right or wrong. I mean, you asked a couple questions on, the 3 year. And then obviously, we'll double check to reinsure that the village, I mean, when it was signed, the boundary agreements were signed as in private roads and the homeowner association, but to make sure there wasn't any village responsibility. I mean, obviously, there's an issue right now because their homeowner association and your side isn't put together. It's not working. There's no members. I mean, that's some of the concerns you have right now as a homeowner association isn't being in play right now, I guess, simple terms, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, see, is there anything that, according to the agreement, that the village was responsible to make sure that we followed through? And again, I'm learning too, right? Is there anything the village is supposed to follow through to help to make sure that the homeowners association?
Yeah, I doubt that. I doubt that. I think it more has to do with, are we relying on a 10-year agreement that, promised some things that didn't happen, not to the fault of necessarily of the village, and yet at the same time, did we hold the developers accountable for high quality work and so forth? And I think that's the question I have. And then thirdly, what can we get for the amount of tax investment that we're offering the village? Because we're 18 minutes away, 12 miles. And I see this 10-year plan for roads. And it's really hard to swallow that, there's nothing there for the money that our residents are paying for the, as was described at the last meeting, budget, meat and potatoes of the budget. So that's maybe we could come up with some things that could be helpful in that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel that each homeowner, when they were sold a lot, were they given these agreements, do you feel, or no?
Yeah, yes, and they were told that there would be an active, I mean, it outlined what the homeowners association would be, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, it would be maintained. It hasn't been maintained. I think there's some negligence there.
Yeah, no, I just wanna make sure everybody was, clear when they bought the lots, and I'm not going with that. I mean, they knew when they bought the lots that there was a homeowner association put in place for the road.
Yeah, and there's also supposed to be a private road. So how private, I guess, I don't want to get into that at 8 minutes till 5. But how private really are those roads? I mean, come on. There's a sign that says you can't beat, I walk the roads a lot and it's fine with me that people come. I think that's great. But they aren't private roads. There's no gate, there's nothing there to indicate that. So, to be sold a bill of goods that it was a private road, kind of hard to,
Okay,
But
that's kind of, developer could put a gate up there with some kind of key fob system if he wanted to, right?
yeah, ask them why they don't do that. But that's what you would assume a private road would entail, right? I mean, there would be it's not private. In reality, it's not private.
Yeah, I know, well, it is and it isn't, right? And I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, if I'm screwing around down there, I could be trespassed from the property. You know, if I'm just driving around to drive around, I could be trespassed from the property and told never to return.
Yeah, I get that, but is that's not.
I know it doesn't
That's not
hold,
what our
doesn't hold
community
a
is
lot of,
like.
no, I know.
You know,
And again, the community in Cedar Rapids, interestingly, they have a lot of subdivisions that are that way. It's just outside the city. And they just like, I think it's as much for the Public Works Department as anything, but like, if the street sign is red, it's a private road. So they don't drive the plow truck down it, you know, they don't take heavy equipment down it. It's, so, I mean, that was, again, different place, but same type of thing. Driving down the road, you wouldn't know, except there's a red street sign in front of the entrance of your subdivision. There's a sign that says, private, residents and guests only. So, for people that do want to access it, there's a warning at least that, hey,
Well,
Well,
okay,
same thing with Lester's driveway, though. We've had problems for years, people just driving in.
to do what? You've had
Just
problems
at
what?
Lester's.
drive down your road.
Drive down the private driveway. You're going through a gate.
Well, that is a problem.
You know you're going, but they still do it anyway. We've come to the point where we close the gate when we leave, just to keep people out. I've got cameras out, still got people pushing the gates open, driving through. What are they doing? I don't know. I don't have a camera of everything, but it's
Wow,
amazing that the balls of people to just do that.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Even almonds have the same problem, and they don't have a gate, but they got pillars next to their driveway, kind of signifying it's a private place, and still got people just driving in. I'm looking around, looking for the park. I wanted to see the lake. I lost my dog. It's all kinds of excuses. And you kind of threaten them, say, please don't do this, but, and usually they don't. It's just, so,
Thanks for the meeting today. Are we adjourned today or?
Yeah, and again, I'll answer these few questions. Before anybody goes, if you could just give me their email and I could try to, coordinate things back and forth, but, appreciate it on behalf of the village board. I mean, everybody attending this, a lot of good information. Like I said, and I appreciate Joe. I brought Joe on and he taught me some things that I don't know. I'll be the first one to tell you that I wasn't anywhere involved in any of this stuff. So it's good to learn all that stuff and try to take back the information again, find the questions that you guys had. And again, reach out to me if you have any questions or anybody else. And in the development, I ever has a question, my phone's always open. Call me. If I don't have the answer, I will find the facts and the truth of the information that came behind it. So,
I can attest to that. Ben's follow through, really good.
so thanks, everybody.
Joe, thanks for the context today.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been a while.
Yeah, your memory